Hey guys, Dr. Justin Marcagiani here. Today we're going to be talking about estrogen. Can your estrogen levels be too low? I'll answer it from both perspectives, male and female today. Really excited for this talk. Before we dive in, please make sure you smash that like button, give me a thumbs up and subscribe. Love to see your comments down below as well. All right, so let's talk about this first. So for women, I see lots of female hormone testing all the time. When we look at estrogen, the question is, where in your cycle are you testing estrogen? And we'll talk about estrogen from a man's perspective, because most men are like, of course, like you don't want estrogen, right? Well, let's dive into that here in just a second. With women, it's very important. You want to look at your estrogen primarily either in the luteal phase with progesterone, and you have to look at it. There'll be a reference range that's specific to the luteal phase, essentially like that'll be the last half of your cycle. So typically in your cycle, you'll see it broken into three categories on the reference range. You'll see follicular, first half of the cycle, typically like days 2 through 10 or so. You'll see ovulation, that's usually about days 12 through 14. And then luteal is usually like day 18 to 19 to like 20, 23. And so when you look at estrogen, you want to see it based on either luteal phase or based on follicular phase. Those are the two times you want to look at it. From a fertility standpoint, you want to see it in that day 2 or day 3. That's the heart of that follicular phase. And ideally, I like to see it in the middle to upper half of the reference range. So either middle to upper 25% of the reference range. I like to look at it next to progesterone. Where's progesterone? If progesterone's in the bottom half and estrogen's in the top quarter, there could be a little bit of an estrogen dominance thing happening. So I'd also want to look at estrogen metabolites. How are we metabolizing estrogen? Do we have good 2-methoxy, 2-hydroxy estrogen levels? That tells me we're metabolizing it and we're excreting it. With females, it's not just estrogen levels, it's estrogen ratios to progesterone. So I like to see pretty good parity within the reference range. So if we're in the middle to upper, let's say, quarter for progesterone, I want estrogen to be pretty much in that area. I'm more worried about progesterone matching estrogen and not necessarily progesterone being a little bit too high. Progesterone has lots of good benefits as long as we're not overly taking it and it's that high because we're taking it. Progesterone has lots of good benefits from activating those GABA chloride channels in the brain, which helps promote relaxation and stress reduction, to help with sleep. It's also anti-cancer in a way. Plus, we live in a soup of estrogens. And so if we're really worried about estrogen levels, we'll talk about the different testing. I prefer, if we're really worried about all the different things, we may look at LCMS testing, which is liquid chromatography mass spectrometry testing versus your typical immunoassay. Those are different options. We have the same thing for testosterone, right? We have the typical enzyme immunoassay versus the LCMS, liquid chromatography mass spectrometry, a little more accurate, especially if we're on the extreme high or extreme low. We'll get numbers for it. The free testosterone level is not going to be a calculation. It'll be direct. And if we're adding in any additional androgens from supplementation or steroids, it'll be able to kind of fret that out, which is really nice. So getting back to estrogen, I want it in that upper half to middle half to quarter, 50 to 25% of the range. So as well as for progesterone, more worried about if estrogen's higher and progesterone's lower, that's where it gets more concerning. For fertility standpoints, we're going to look at it in that first day 2, day 3 of the cycle. And again, we'll still look at progesterone. The best time to look at progesterone is right around day 19 to 22. It's a pretty good place to look at it. Now, with women, can estrogen go too low? That's a big problem. When you get stressed, you're going to see estrogen go low. Typically, what you'll see is DHEA sulfate drop on the adrenals, and that's the backup generator for a lot of your estrogen. So that's a big deal. So adrenal weakness, start to see a lot of times cortisol start to drop if it's chronic, because then progesterone will drop as well, because progesterone can go downstream to actually make cortisol. So we'll see progesterone fall when cortisol typically falls. And then a lot of times as that adrenal starts to dysfunction, DHEA sulfate will drop, and then we'll see estrogen a lot of times drop with it. But we could still have lower estrogen and have progesterone even lower and still have that estrogen dominance. Now with men, definitely a big deal. When guys get estrogen too low, and a lot of times with the guys, because it's too low, usually using medications like an Arimidex or some kind of estrogen blocking medication, right? It's like maybe an aromatase inhibitor. And usually it's going to be like drugs, right? Things like, let's see here, aromatase inhibition compounds for guys to lower estrogen. Those would be things like DIM, indole 3-carbinol, like cruciferous type of things to help detoxification. I'm not really worried about that. It's going to be more of your medications, things like Arimidex. Now, the problem with Estrogen, when that goes too low, it can actually cause more fat issues too, especially breast fat. You get worried about gynecomastia on the high side, but you can have some breast fat on the low side too. Also, mood. Estrogen's very important for mood with men, very neurologically protective, and also heart disease. The theory is this is why most bodybuilders are having heart issues. It's not because of steroids, it's because they're knocking out the estrogen. So typically, if you use testosterone, as you go higher with testosterone, there will be some aromatization of testosterone to estrogen. So as testosterone goes up, estrogen goes up as well. So this is why when you're looking at on a reference range, your typical LabCorp reference range or Quest Lab will be less than 39. I like to see estrogen in somewhere in the 20s. That's a pretty good place in the middle. You knock it out too low, that's going to create vascular inflammation, poor bone health, and mood issues. So estrogen is very neuro and cardiovascular protective. So you don't want to knock it out too low. If you're going to try to lower your estrogen, I mean, obviously the first thing you lower it by is diet and lifestyle. You reduce inflammation. Inflammation a lot of times can cause cortisol. Cortisol can cause increased blood sugar. Increased blood sugar can cause insulin. Insulin causes aromatization, right? And then that's via the stress pathway. But then you can also have that same thing happen with just too much carbs, too much processed sugar, gluten, all that stuff. So the first thing is we do it by reducing inflammation, and we do it by reducing insulin and carbs. And then we can use natural anti-inflammatories, curcumin, high-dose fish oil, good healthy fats that will also reduce inflammation as well. And then natural supplementation, we can use things like DIM or indole 3-carbinol, calcium deglucarate. We can just have good upregulation of glutathione like NAC and or just acetyl liposomal reduced glutathione will help lower that estrogen level in a modulatory way. It won't shut down the pathway like an Arimidex or there's lots of other newer medications that are out that block that estrogen metabolism from happening. You'll see it with guys that are on finasteride. If you block that DHT pathway, so your 5-alpha reductase, your 5-AR enzyme takes testosterone here and converts it to DHT, which is a stronger testosterone, but not as anabolic, meaning it's technically stronger from a hormonal standpoint, but it will not cause muscle growth. You'll see more hair growth, other parts of the body, hair loss on top of the head. So testosterone to DHT, you will block that. So what happens? So this is like a finasteride, right? Finasteride, Propecia, you will block testosterone, the DHT gets blocked 70, 80%. Now testosterone goes up, 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 up. If it goes too high, let's say you're a guy that already had higher testosterone, you're blocking DHT, now testosterone's going even higher. Let's say you're at 900, 1,000, let's say you're in the top 10% of the reference range, top 20%. Now you're going to start to have this aromatization happen because testosterone's overflowing. That aromatization enzyme stop regulating, and now you're having more estrogen. So these are the guys that have side effects when they're taking finasterides. These are the guys that are just already have higher levels of androgens, and it's tipping it over the top. It's activating that aromatase enzyme, and aromatase is going to take your testosterone and go to estrogen. Again, there's two major enzymes we're talking about here. So the AR enzyme, alpha reductase, goes testosterone to DHT. Then we have aromatase, and that's going to go from testosterone to estrogen. A little confusing. AR, alpha reductase, and then aromatase, testosterone, estrogen. A little confusing there. So with women, the issue is more estrogen dominance. That's going to be just higher levels of estrogen relative to progesterone in the reference range. And with guys, you can knock it out too much. It's usually going to be a pharmaceutical intervention that's going to do that. This is what most bodybuilders actually die of. They do not die of elevations of androgens. It's typically the reduction of estrogen, having the low estrogen and the scarring and the vascular inflammation that can drive. So it's very important that when you look at these things, you want to look at it holistically. If you're taking finasteride, Propecia, or something for hair loss, you want to look at your testosterone free and total, look at LCMS levels, right? And then also look at your LCMS DHT. Make sure you're not bottoming it out too low. Still keep it, at least 20 to 30-ish. Don't bottom it out too low. And then obviously use a lot of the nutrients to help with natural detoxification of estrogens. If estrogen's going up, use your NAC, use your DIM, use your good healthy cruciferous vegetables in your diet. Keep your insulin in check. Now, women, when estrogen goes low, we want to use things that are going to modulate receptor sites. So we're going to be using things like maca, damiana. We'll use herbs. We're going to eat healthy proteins and fats and cholesterols because estrogen is a steroid-based hormone. So we got to make sure we are providing the building blocks for our healthy hormones. We're going to look at the adrenals. We're going to look at a cortisol rhythm test because if our DHEA is low, I guarantee you're beating the crap out of your adrenals and you're going to have a flat adrenal level or a reverse cortisol pattern on your adrenal cortisol rhythm. So we got to look at that. We'll look at DHEA sulfate as well. We'll look at estrogen levels maybe in that first follicular phase, day 2 and 3, and we'll look at it around day 20-ish of your cycle as well, along with progesterone. We'll get a window where that sits. That's really helpful. And we'll look at DHEA sulfate. And then if we have issues there, we'll work on getting to the underlying issue of stress. Now, one of the most important things is gut has to be looked at. It's a major source of a lot of stress and inflammation. It's where you absorb all the building blocks and nutrients to make all these hormones. It's a hidden source of stress and inflammation for many people. If we have SIBO or H. pylori or gluten sensitivity or gut inflammation, that's going to be a hidden source of stress impacting our immune function and impacting a lot of absorption of these nutrients. So very important out of the gates. So for guys, can estrogens go too low? Yes. All right. Mainly under pharmaceutical means. Talked about natural ways to reduce it. And women, can estrogen go too low for you? Sure. It's more going to be on the estrogen dominance I'm more worried about. And I always look at estrogen in relationship to progesterone. And for both sexes, men and women, very important that we do not get excess, we do not get any exogenous hormones coming in from microplastics, from BPA, even BPSs, right? People are like, oh, I'm BPA free, right? My plastic's BPA free. Well, you probably have BPS, which is actually even worse. So it's very important that you keep that out of the mix. Look at your pesticides. Look at your atrazine in the water supply right here in Texas. Half the water supply is loaded with atrazine. So you want a good reverse osmosis water filter, or just drink a really good known healthy, mineral water like a Mountain Valley or a Gerald Steiner or a Topo Chico, something that has a good reputation behind it. I know Mountain Valley lab testers too. So very important. Even the PFAS as well, which is in a lot of the non-stick stuff. So really good to look at all of these things out of the gates, guys. All right, if you want to dive in deeper, if you want more support on your hormones, whether you're male or female, click down below. I see functional medicine patients worldwide. If you want to dive in and get that support, I'm here to help. The team is here to help. Outside of that, questions and comments below. Love to see it. You guys have a phenomenal day. Take care, y'all. Bye.